So the point of this is to identify how impactful you feel that your family was in your upbringing and your identity on and your life outcomes and why you feel this way. So I think that we can agree that our families have a tremendous amount of power over our understanding of what is normal, natural, right, and good. It's everything that we learn about socialization, about how to view the world, about what relationships are supposed to look like. We learn from them. Like, our parents' marriage is, like, that's our ideal relationship, or it's supposed to be. How we interact and how they interact shapes the way that we construct our own identities, as well as setting foundations for our future relationships. So what we're supposed to do is talk about how our family has affected us in our outlook on the world, for the better or for the worse. How do these variables or experiences compare and contrast with things that we've talked about? So, like, socialization and values. How have your family's beliefs and values shaped your worldview and decision-making process?
Are you talking about, like, my parents or me to you?
Your parents. You're not my mother.
Oh, right. Okay, say it again.
How has your family's beliefs and values shaped your worldview and decision-making process?
I think it was a foundation laid by my mother and father that was systematic in how I make decisions and how I lay out my life. Like, for example, my dad sat me down and said, this is how you balance a checkbook, and this is how you should, spend your money, and this is what you shouldn't do with your money. What was the other part?
Your worldview and your decision-making processes.
Yeah.
How does their beliefs shape that? Their beliefs and values.
Well, I think, like I said, they lay a foundation of, my dad was right Republican. My mother follows what my father does. My dad would listen to Rush Limbaugh on the speaker on our refrigerator every single day. He read the paper, and he would tell me, I would ask about world events that were happening, like the Gulf War, and then as I got older, I started seeking the information elsewhere.
So, you are an adult now. You've been without your parents for 30 years. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount of time. And you have your own established beliefs. We have our own established values that you've created in your own life. How has these differing values led to conflict or tension? And how did that affect you with your parents?
Well, I think I initially rebelled and was very left and went against pretty much everything my parents believed out of rebellion. And then as I've had my own family, I would say I've come back towards my father's and mother's belief and the idea of traditionalism and roles within the household. But the tension comes from my parents being very religious and me rebelling against that religion, and my mother expressing her concern that, for example, that I was not gonna make it into heaven because I wasn't going to church every Sunday and taking the Eucharist. And as I've gotten older, I would say those conflicts have decreased. They just don't talk about it. We just don't talk about it. And I think being more aligned politically and socially has decreased some of that tension.
What about the emotional support, or lack thereof? How has that impacted you?
Emotional support on what?
From your parents. just in general?
I think that they've always been emotionally supportive, especially my mother. But unfortunately, I feel like I couldn't be honest with them sometimes because I was afraid that I was going to hurt them. So, how supportive can you be if someone isn't telling you the truth? She's still someone that I can call if I'm upset, or, but like, I had to learn to be resilient without their emotional support on issues that they wouldn't agree with.
How do you think that's impacted your other relationships?
I think I've become judgmental about religion, and therefore if someone tells me straight off the bat that they are really religious or tries to recruit me to their religion, I immediately feel a bias towards them. So it's probably kept me at arm's length from people that I could have been close to, but I felt prejudiced against their religion before I even got a chance to know them.
So if not your parents, who do you think who do you think has served as the biggest role model for you?
Yikes. Probably my older brother.
How has your relationship with him influenced your behavior and choices?
Him and I are aligned more when it comes to religion and social issues, and so I felt like I could go to my brother and talk to him when I couldn't talk to my parents. And he's older, he's 12 years older, so he was like a second father to me. What was the question?
How was your relationship with him taking on that role? How does that influence your other relationships? So with him being your biggest role model, and even as you're saying a second father, how has him taking on that role influence your other relationships?
Well, I love the idea that he's always been there for me, no matter what. Even if he gets mad at me, he's always been there for me and my family. And so I thought, I want my children to have that relationship between each other. I think I see a big brother as having a responsibility to their younger siblings in the way that my brother was to me.
Have you noticed like any behaviors in your life? I know that earlier we were talking about how you do things differently from your mom. Like with our relationship, you interact with me differently than she did, and you purposefully avoid that. But have you noticed like anything else that you've consciously avoided your parents doing?
Oh gosh, so many things.
I worded that so wrong.
So many things.
Like, what do you purposefully do differently than them?
Well, I purposely for a long time, which I've recently amended my thinking, but I purposely shielded my children from politics and world social issues, economic issues, because it was so stressful for me as a kid. So when I remember when like the Gulf War happened, or Desert Storm, like I remember asking my dad, like, are we gonna be bombed? And hearing all of that chatter all the time as a kid, like him overtly expressing concerns about the economy or the president or the state of the country. Then as a kid, it was stressful because I didn't understand it. So I was like, oh man, we're gonna get a nuclear blast, or we're gonna all be homeless, we're not gonna have enough money to eat, or whatever it was. And so I purposely shielded you guys, my children, to not have to worry about big issues like that. Let's see, my parents were very strict, so I think for a while I tried to be cool, like less strict and more more open. Had conversation, like my parents never talked about sex with me, except for we had the talk one time, but it was like very taboo. So I tried to have conversations with the kids, like age appropriate conversations as we grew up, so that it wasn't a taboo subject to have.
What about conflict resolution? How was that dynamic growing up, and how does it differ now? And how do you think it affects you?
Conflict resolution at my house as a kid? Well, there just wasn't any.
It was avoidant?
Yeah, my mother does not deal well with conflict, and she's very non-confrontational, so the solution was you just don't discuss it, and you just put it under the rug. And then it's not that she would never have hard conversations with me, but if it was emotionally charged, that's when she had trouble having the conversation. And so what would happen is we just wouldn't discuss them, and she was always trying to protect me from feeling anything but happy. And so then if I blew up or she blew up, it was out of frustration that you've been holding or bottling in stuff. So with you guys, I don't know if I did a better job, because I probably just talked you to death. But the kids, I wanted it to be open communication, but I know that I swept some things under the rug, like hard issues. I don't know, it's a good question.
How do you think that's influenced your approach to conflict in your own relationships? Not just with your kids, but...
Oh, I'm a very direct person, and nothing goes under the rug. And then I had to learn that not every battle has to be fought, because I took the opposite approach. So like, I'm like, no, I'm going to railroad you into this conversation because we're not avoiding it, because I wanted to be so different from my mom in that way, that then I would put people in my life, I'd put them off, because not everybody likes confrontation. And so I would confront them and try to resolve it, and most of the times I could get a resolution, but it wasn't the right approach, and I probably could have gotten a lot farther in the relationships if I had maybe gone about it in a indirect or less direct way. Why are you laughing?
Can you identify any long-term effects of unresolved conflicts within your family on your well-being or your interpersonal relationships?
My sister comes to mind.
I just asked you that.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I can't think of anything.
No, everything's great. We worked everything out. Yeah. I would say my sister, that's the biggest one.
She threw a lamp at you.
She did, and she threw a vacuum cleaner at me. She threw a case of Dr. Pepper at me.
And that went unresolved for a long time.
It's still kind of unresolved, because even when I brought it to her, she's like, I don't remember that at all. She did apologize.
But it wasn't.
I don't know, I feel like it's a cop-out when you're like, oh, I don't remember.
I'm sorry, that's what you remember.
Yeah. So now we're just at a place of like, we tiptoe around certain discussions. We just avoid talking about certain things in order to keep the peace, because my mother gets so upset if we're fighting.
Yeah, that's that avoidant conflict resolution showing back up.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I have.